Do you wear any masks? And if so, who are the masks meant to fool? I would wager that the masks are meant to fool yourself. That's what we talk about today on today's show of the Hard Thing podcast. This is the show that is designed to help you pull off those masks, confront the reality of life, and learn how to do hard things so that way, when future hard things come down the pipe, you're ready. I'm your host, Justin Lewis, and I'm excited to present to you my conversation with today's guest, Simon Chapple. He has experiences in overcoming alcohol, not necessarily alcoholism, just breaking free from the need to drink alcohol to feel like himself, or really someone who seems like himself. We talk a lot about identity, addiction. We talk a lot about emotions and coping mechanisms. Today was a very insightful conversation, and honestly for me, somewhat timely for some personal struggles I'm going through right now. And if you want to know more about that, you're going to have to reach out to me on Instagram at the Hard Thing Podcast, and I'd be happy to chat with you about that. But it's a great conversation. I don't want to hold it back too long, so let's go ahead and jump into today's show of the Hard Thing Podcast, where we do hard things and we overcome average. All right, well, thank you for coming on the Hard Thing Podcast, Simon. I'm excited to have you here, and I know we've been kind of back and forth with the scheduling, and that's totally my bad, but I'm happy to get you on the show.
I'm super excited to be here, Justin. Thanks for having me. It's great to connect at last.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in with the question that I ask every single guest. Simon, what's the hardest thing you've ever done?
Well, I've been giving this a bit of thought. Obviously, your podcast is the hard thing. And quitting drinking was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done. But actually the stuff that followed that, the exploration of myself and finding out who I really was, in some respects was even harder. And I think I'd like to talk about that today and share some of my own personal journey, because I think it'll probably help some of your listeners, especially those who are questioning their relationship with alcohol.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent two topics, quitting drinking and the follow-up exploration of myself. I find that very fascinating. But yeah, let's start off with quitting drinking. And first tell us, I don't drink personally, but I know that there are people out there who do and enjoy that. Why did you choose to stop drinking?
So I'd been drinking since my mid-teens, and looking back, I mean, this kind of ties into the other hard thing that I shared. Looking back, the reason I began drinking, which is probably where we want to start with it, was around my childhood. My mum was kind of emotionally absent for me as a child. My dad abandoned the family, was never interested in me. He left when I was 2 years old, was rarely in my life. So there was this immediate kind of foundation that I got off on that wasn't particularly brilliant. And then when I was 13, 14, I was sexually abused by a neighbour. And it wasn't long after that I started taking the remains of my dad's red wine to my bedroom. I didn't piece this together until a long time later. And I guess it helped me change the way I felt. I didn't realise I felt bad at the time. I wasn't very conscious of it. But ultimately, it was about changing the way that I felt. Instead of looking at the way I felt and exploring why I felt that way in the first place, I just changed it. And alcohol was a really easy way of doing that. But I did it every day. That behavior just kept going on and on. Every single day, as from 14 onwards, I was drinking. There were literally a handful of days right across that time up until my 40s when I didn't drink. It was generally if I was laid up in bed with the flu or if I was in hospital for a procedure that I wouldn't drink if I was forced not to do it. And when I got to about 40, it was around 4 or 5 years before I quit, I started to question that relationship. I'd seen something on the news about the dangers of alcohol, how it can affect your mental health, your anxiety, as well as physical impact of alcohol as well. And it really started to cause this inner conflict within me. Suddenly there was part of me that wanted to continue drinking. I didn't want to hear this stuff, But there was also part of me that was saying, you need to stop, you need to make a change. And I kept trying and trying to change my behavior, but I just kept going back to that same place. So the long answer to the question, why did I stop drinking? It was to end the internal conflict. I'd moved out of a place of ignorant bliss where I was just drinking and didn't really care. I wasn't really thinking about it. I'd become aware that it was some kind of a problem and I needed to do something. Because if I'd stayed stuck in that place of internal conflict, cognitive dissonance, it's one of the most painful places you can be when you've just got an argument going on in your mind. And that was the reason why I took the decision to make the change that I did.
Yeah, it's like an internal civil war where the only casualties are yourself, you know.
You couldn't have put it better. I actually put that in my second book. I talked about it in the context of an army, two armies who go to war in your head.
Yeah.
And then we act, I call it the drunken dictator. We end up taking different sides depending how we feel. One day we're supporting one army, the next day we're supporting the other, sorry.
Yeah. One thing I found really fascinating, and I got to ask, when you saw it on the news, kind of all those symptoms, or not symptoms, but effects of drinking alcohol consistently, had you felt any of those effects? Or was it something that you could see yourself having in the future?
I think I was more worried about what would happen in the future, like things like cancer and liver damage. And I'd had a friend of mine who had died from liver disease, and I didn't even realize he was a fairly heavy drinker. But it was more the mental health problems. I'd experienced severe anxiety, mood swings. I knew my relationship was suffering. I was emotionally disconnected from my wife. I knew I wasn't the dad that I wanted to be to my son. So it was more those things rather than the physical implications. However, when I did quit, the physical changes I saw, darkness under my eyes faded away after about 3 weeks. My skin was kind of glowing. My face became thinner because it wasn't bloated. And it was just incredible to see that. And it really spurred me on.
Wow. I think that is crucial. The fact that you saw some of the effects maybe, but not all of them. And you were, I want to say humble as the word, humble enough to look at that and say, hey, this is maybe my future. And if I don't do something now, that's what's gonna happen. I'm curious, and maybe it has something to do with your friend passing away, and figuring out that he was a heavy drinker. But what do you think prepared you to take that as a warning and really take it to heart and make those changes?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. It was definitely once that initial genie was out the bottle, that seeing that piece on the news, someone talking about the dangers of alcohol, then I started Googling. And once I started Googling, it was more than just a warning. Everything was sort of slapping me in the face, saying to me, this is a problem. You know, I would Google, am I an alcoholic? Do I have a drinking problem? And everything would come back, yes, yes, yes. So I think there was just a combination of factors. And then once that seed was planted, I just couldn't not look at it any longer and knew that I had to take some form of action.
Well, I guess that's a testament of the power of knowledge, that the more you kind of are confronted with a truth, the less power you have of just hiding yourself from it, or obscuring the truth from yourself once you really realize this is what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I now work as a sobriety coach, and I've written 2 books about stopping drinking, one about trauma in childhood, which comes out in December. And so many people stay stuck in that place of kind of denial. And in fact, only a couple of days ago, someone was saying to me, well, have I really got a problem? My friends drink more than me and I compare myself to my friends. And, you know, I did that. I was using that as an excuse. Yeah, my friends drink more than me, so I must be okay. And many other different excuses too to go alongside it. But I think that's part of the process. It's almost like a grieving process, to be honest. You go through it. And one of those one of the stages of grieving is denial, and another stage is bargaining, trying to work out a way where, oh, well, maybe I could drink a bit later. Maybe I could water my alcohol down, just drink at the weekends.
That's fascinating that you compare that to the grieving process. And I wonder if there's more instances in life where we do go through that grieving process, and maybe that grieving process isn't just for grieving, but it's kind of making our way through any change, you know.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I mean, working with people day in, day out with addictions, that grieving process comes up time and time again, not just around alcohol, particularly around addictions, I see it. But as you say, I think around any type of difficult change, or where we get a sense that maybe we're losing out on something, then I think you do go through that grieving process. But understanding the different stages of it and knowing that you come out the other side of it invariably gaining so much. One of the strap lines that I use is that it's not what we lose, it's what we gain when we stop drinking. We gain so much, and it's just absolutely incredible. And I think when you can view it like that, you can start to get your mindset in the right place, that this isn't a journey of loss and deprivation. It's a lifestyle choice that we're making in the context of alcohol. And I think that's the same with any sort of life change. If you've got a strong reason why, and you truly understand it, and you're motivated for that reason, if you know what you're going to get from it, then you're going to become determined. I often say to people, think about any time in life when you've wanted to achieve something, maybe moving house, having a baby, changing jobs, getting married. The more you have a strong reason why you want to do it, the more determined you are, the more motivated you are, the more you smash obstacles out of your own way. And I think working on mindset is a big thing, and that can help you through that kind of grieving period, because you can see the bigger picture on the other side.
To help our audience kind of picture this a little bit better, walk us through what exactly you did and tried, and what worked and what didn't work after you decided, hey, I'm going to make this change, and the process that you went through in changing your mindset and your behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk you through that. And I think it's important for your audience to understand that this can apply to just about any addiction or behavior change. And people often say to me, is this an addiction? Have I got an addiction? And all addictions are on a spectrum. And I won't go deeply into this, but they're all on a spectrum. And I think if it's having a negative impact on your life, if you feel that something has control over you rather than you having control over it, that there's probably some level of addictive behavior going on. But the process that I went through was essentially a 5-stage process. The first was unawareness. I talked about ignorant bliss. That was the first stage. I was completely unaware, didn't even realize I had a problem. And unfortunately, with addictions, a lot of people stay in that place. They don't even look. They don't want to look. But eventually, for most of us, the universe slaps us in the face somehow. We might end up getting divorced, crash the car, something bad might happen that is a wake-up call. But some people don't take the wake-up call and wait for another one to happen and another one. And after being unaware, the next stage is becoming aware. We start to actually acknowledge that there is a problem and I need to do something about it. That's that internal conflict phase that I spoke about. And from there, the next step that I went on to was learning about it and educating myself. I think beating any addiction is like learning a new skill. It's like learning a new language. And I did exactly that. Not learned a new language. I taught myself it like a new skill. I learned everything I could about sobriety. I made it my hobby and I immersed myself in it. I joined Facebook groups. I read just about every book. I listened to podcasts and just soaked up as much as I could about the best methods of quitting drinking, and learned exactly what worked for people, what wasn't working for people. I mean, there's not a one size fits all, but there's lots of best practices you can follow to set yourself up for success. And I can share some of those if you want me to go into that. But after the education process, it's about putting it into practice in the real world. It's all very well learning this stuff and reading it, but you've got to form new beliefs, true new beliefs, and replace your old limiting beliefs. And that might be, for example, I used to believe that I couldn't have fun if I didn't drink. So if I went to a party, I absolutely thought that I needed alcohol to have fun at a party. I had a strong association between the two. And I had to break that. I had to form new beliefs. And the only way to do that was to bring the belief out into the light and challenge it and actually look at whether it was completely true. And then also to get out into the real world and actually do it, but in a kind of safe and supported way, with people around me who were going to look out for me, knowing that I could leave if I needed to leave, which in the early days, I did have to do that a few times. So that was the fourth stage. And then after a period of maybe 4 to 6 months, more like 6 months, you move from practice to kind of mastering it. You're not really having cravings to drink anymore. You're not really thinking about drinking anymore. It's just become a new normal. And you're starting to get all of these wonderful gifts that come into your life, such as feeling grounded, much calmer, mentally resilient, anxiety's gone to 2 out of 10 instead of 9 out of 10, relationships improving. So that's the stage of mastery, which I think is where most people want to get to ultimately. And I think that grieving process almost follows those same things as well as you go through it.
Yeah. Wow. I love those 5 steps a lot. And actually want to dig into each one. With the awareness stage, you said it usually takes the universe, life, God, however you put it, to slap us in the face a little bit. And then you did mention that sometimes it takes more than one slap in the face. How can we get ourselves into a position where we don't necessarily need the slap in the face to become aware? If that makes sense.
I think that's a great question. And I think what's worked for me around that is becoming really clear on who I am, what I like doing in my life, like genuinely like doing, becoming radically honest, speaking my truth, not bending the truth, telling white lies, telling big lies, and getting really clear on my values and aligning my life with my values. Because I think we invite pain and suffering and difficulty into our lives when we do things that go against our own values. A simple example would be somebody who has a strong value of honesty, yet they're working in a job in a call center, bending the truth, doing high pressure sales, for example, which is the opposite of honesty. But actually taking a look at that and making sure our life aligns with our values. Because I think a lot of the pain around addictions comes when actually we are going against our values. This isn't who we are, it's where we are. And that's a big difference. And it's not who we are because it doesn't go with our values. So I think bringing anything out into the light is hugely beneficial, and almost taking a really honest inventory of our lives and just looking at how those behaviors align with our values. And I think if there's an addictive behavior, it would nearly always come up on that kind of moral inventory that we did of ourselves.
I'd also like to add that I think doing this kind of exercise might even make you realize, hopefully before some grand event in life that could really hurt you, hopefully it makes you realize that maybe you don't have values, or you haven't really explored those, and you're like, what do I value? Because I think those values kind of form a foundation that keeps us afloat in life's maelstrom, if I can say that,
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, they can act like guardrails for life, can't they?
Yeah.
And yeah, you're completely spot on there. And so many of the people, I mean, I work with thousands of people. I have communities online with thousands of people in them. And so many of the people I do group coaching and things like that they have never looked at this stuff. They've never brought it out into the light. Alcohol literally numbs our senses, numbs our emotions, numbs our feelings. And people drink instead of looking at it. But this is the beauty of taking a break from drinking initially. It takes the mask off and you're forced to look at yourself and start to ask these questions about who you are, what you enjoy, where you should put some boundaries in place. You know, what are the things that bring up emotional triggers for you, etc. Whereas before it was reach for a drink. I don't even want to look at it or feel it.
Yeah. I like that phrase, take the mask off, because I think, I mean, obviously we're all familiar with the concept of, wearing masks for wearing masks kind of for the benefit of other people. So that way they see us as a certain kind of person. But I don't think we look at ourselves enough and realize that we're wearing masks from ourselves, hiding things that we don't want to look at, just kind of living in denial. And taking that mask off is a very hard thing to do. And that kind of brings me to the next point with the education portion. You said that you just dove in, you learned everything you could, podcasts, books, YouTube videos, I'm guessing. To me, that screams commitment. And I think commitment is measured by what you're willing to try to get wherever you're trying to go. And I'm curious, how did you develop that much commitment? Or was it just that you just had enough?
Yeah, I think I was sick and tired of being sick and tired of the daily rituals, the hangover, the fog that was just constantly there. And I also, being honest and talking about wearing masks and egos, I think there was also, as I started joining Facebook communities, seeing people posting about being 50 days, 100 days sober, I wanted to take them on. I wanted to do it too. And I wanted to post in those groups. I mean, thankfully, that part of me I've worked on too since I quit drinking, but I think it actually served me having that kind of ego-driven behavior in those early stages. So there was definitely part of that. Plus I have ADHD. So when I get the bit between my teeth, I either can't pay attention to things or I hyper focus on them and just can't put them down until I've done it. And thankfully with sobriety, it was one of those.
Yeah, I think that is a superpower in that instance. And I've seen that, not necessarily ADHD, but I've seen kind of that the doggedness, the ability just to hold on to something so tenaciously and not give it up in a lot of my other guests. And I think that is a trait that leads many to success, the ability to just to stick with something until you've got it,
Yeah, completely. And it's interesting. Another thing that set me up was, again, this is my addictive nature, but in the 5 years prior to quitting drinking, in fact, I think 2 were after I quit drinking, I'd done 16 marathons, including an ultra marathon. And I often talk about the marathon mindset. You know, we start off just like in sobriety and everything feels great. It's like a big honeymoon, those early, maybe the first day or the first couple of days. And then just like a marathon, after a few miles, it kind of goes a bit flat. There's not as many people cheering you on. Maybe the rain starts coming down as well. And that's the difficult bit, those middle miles. But when we stick at it and just keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter what we're trying to achieve in life, eventually the crowd starts to get bigger. The sun comes out again. We start thinking about the finish line instead of thinking about quitting. And before we know it, we're crossing the finish line and we feel like a hero. So I think that marathon mindset also helped me, that kind of ability to dig in. And even when the going gets tough, knowing that ultimately I'm going to get to the goal and the goal is worth it. And I think that's the key thing. You've got to understand what you're going to gain and have that really big, strong reason why. I also made a non-negotiable commitment, and that was that I would never put alcohol in front of my wife or my son ever again. And that meant not drinking. And I didn't want to go back on that. I'd shared it with my son. He was like 12 or 13 at the time that I quit. And I didn't want to let him down. And I also didn't want to let my wife down or myself. But I liked putting that extra pressure on myself. And I came out, they call it coming out when you tell people you're sober. I came out on social media within a couple of weeks of quitting drinking, which I don't advise people to do. But again, it applied a positive pressure to me and I just didn't want to see myself fail. So that helped me through as well.
I can easily see how those measures would maybe push another type of person to kind of go the opposite way. So what you said before about how every person's different and there are lots of different things that can help, and well, like you said, you got to practice doing what works or what doesn't work and figure out what works for you until you master it. And I think that's crucial, that people understand that they really need to, based on their education, all the things that they're willing to try, they need to find the right combination of things that helps them personally. Because for someone else, putting out on Facebook 2 weeks after they decided might not be the best thing. Maybe they should wait 6 months, but for other people, they might have needed to do it sooner, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, I think just having a level of acceptance that it's never a straight line journey. I'm sure pretty much every guest you've had on your show has rarely had a straight line journey. There's always challenges, there's always setbacks, and taking an approach that the setbacks are there to teach us. They're a lesson, they're a signpost. What can I do differently going forward so that that setback doesn't happen again, rather than I'm a failure? I always talk about falling forwards rather than falling down. Fall forwards, do it with momentum, no matter what you're doing, fall forwards.
Yeah. I heard on a podcast the other day, and this is kind of not off topic, but hopefully you get the connection, but he was talking about communication styles, and he described being assertive, communicating in an assertive way, as being caring enough about the other person in a long-term mindset to be direct enough or be supportive enough, I guess was what he was kind of saying. The emphasis was on caring about the other person with a long-term mindset. And I think in cases like this, personal growth, changing behaviors, you have to have that same mindset of, I care about Justin in a long-term fashion, so I need to do whatever is going to help him in the most longest term possible. And that might mean learning from a setback and being willing to try something, seeing if it works, learning that it doesn't, and being willing to change my immediate behaviors in behalf of what works long term, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds like sound advice from that podcast. And also, I think just knowing that that there's going to be some short-term pain, without a doubt. And when it comes to stopping drinking or breaking an addiction, often the short-term pain, particularly around substances and alcohol, is things like disrupted sleep. With any addiction, there's generally cravings, there's emotional instability for a period of time, and it can be tough. It can be really, really hard. And obviously, depending how much you drank, how often you drank, and how long you drank for, depends on the symptoms and how long they last for. But it can be tough. And I see so many people go back to day one over and over and over because they can't get over those initial few obstacles. And even though the obstacle course perhaps isn't that long, those initial obstacles can be really, really challenging.
Yeah, the start, for what I've seen, is kind of going back to that marathon mindset. For positive things, the start is always fun. But for negative things, the start seems to take forever. So if you can just get past the start, and kind of get into a groove, things get much, much easier, I would say, at least from what I've seen. But kind of changing topics a little bit, we've been talking about the quitting drinking aspect, but I want to talk and spend kind of the rest of the time of the second part of your first answer, exploration of yourself. Because as you said, drinking is a coping mechanism, or for many people, it is a coping mechanism. And whether that's a healthy one or not, personal exploration of that question. But when you take that coping mechanism away, obviously you're still left with whatever you were trying to cope with. So how did you deal with kind of what the alcohol was hiding?
Yeah, and that was the unexpected part of it. I talk about the unexpected joy of sobriety, but this was an unexpected challenge of sobriety that I wasn't counting on happening. And it was that same thing we were talking about earlier, that removal of the mask, you're forced to look in the mirror. You're essentially emotionally naked and have to take a long, hard look at yourself. And initially I was all over the place. There was a long period of feeling like I was on a pink cloud and really euphoric and happy. And then suddenly things started to go a bit flat. And my anxiety wasn't out of control again, but it was going up. But I was more really struggling to deal with feelings. And I did a lot of therapy work. I changed my direction in terms of what I was educating myself. So I kind of treated it a bit like another addiction. I'd become aware, and that was the first stage again. I started educating myself, and then I started practicing these new behaviors. And I think that journey, I think the last time we get to do some work on ourselves is about 15 minutes before we die, because it's a constant journey. We just continue on that journey of self-discovery and self-improvement. But you touched on something earlier as well around acknowledging the parts of ourselves. And I think one of the big breakthroughs for me was actually learning to accept the parts of me that I'd never really looked at, the parts I'd hidden, the parts of myself I'd denied or repressed, the parts that are kind of ugly. And that's a hard thing for people to do. We talk about ego-driven behaviors and only showing that one side of ourselves to the real world, when actually we're all made of different ingredients. And there's often, well, with everybody, we've all got dark parts, bits in the middle, and really great parts. But I've been working a lot around that, actually owning some of those behaviors, some of those traits that I have that maybe feel a bit uncomfortable to actually say, yeah, there's times when I do that. There's times when I judge people. I think we all do, but a lot of people will not acknowledge that they do that, and then they get emotionally triggered by it. But yeah, sorry, I've gone off topic a bit, but it was a lot of therapy work, a lot of learning, and just again, that hunger to get to that place. I think I've been in pursuit of happiness my entire life, and this started to feel like I was really, really getting there. And then thankfully, after 18 months or so of quitting drinking, I really did start to feel some true peace in my life and really sort of shift some of the big obstacles out of my way by healing some really challenging traumas. Writing about it helped as well. So the 2 books about stopping drinking were really cathartic for me. They helped me through the period where I was quitting alcohol and the subsequent year after. And then my book coming out in December, How to Heal Your Inner Child, really helped me through my trauma work and making peace with my mum and the way she was emotionally neglectful towards me. So that helped as well. Some people just keep a journal. I like to write books.
I find it maybe poetic is the right way to say it, that you describe it as before this war within your head, these 2 opposing armies. And then you just used the term making peace, which I find very, again, poetic, that's exactly what you kind of need to do. You need to make peace with, like you said, all the aspects of your life, yourself, your memories, your experiences, and really come to terms with who you are as a person and say kind of, I am whole. I'm this whole person. I find it interesting in the Bible, Jesus Christ says, love God or love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the second commandment that he says. And I think that many people, we kind of forget that we're supposed to love ourselves as well, not to get spiritual or anything. Hopefully, that doesn't offend anyone, but I just find that fascinating that process it begins to integrate your whole self together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, though. I mean, the number of people who I work with, and they're a million miles away from self-love. I think at the heart of all of this, and I absolutely was too, by the way, and I don't even know if I'm there yet with self-love. I think I'm definitely up to self-like, but maybe not quite self-love. But at the heart of all of this, everything we've talked about today, addictive behavior that you could even describe as self-harm, ultimately, is one thing, and it's toxic shame. And toxic shame is something that we carry from our early years. And I believe that every addiction it comes and stems from toxic shame, because we're ultimately trying to change the way that we feel. Some people don't agree with this, so it's a little bit of a controversial topic, but a lot of other people do. But toxic shame is essentially when our self-esteem has been affected, or we feel a sense of just being not good enough in some way. And that's been hardwired into us at an early age, maybe just by a parent who used to sigh when we talked as a toddler because they didn't want to hear what we had to say, or a parent who just was never there because they were always at work, or in my case, a dad who just wasn't interested in me and left the family home. Whatever it is, there's toxic shame and an inability to love ourselves. And then we find it easier, as you rightly say, to love other people. And we give all of that out and we just forget about ourselves. We forget about looking after number one. Some people might say it's selfish, but I think it's the least selfish thing you can do, because that positive energy just ripples outwards and affects everybody in a wonderful way.
Yeah. I think part of it might just be we don't have anyone, many people don't have someone teaching them how to truly love themselves, because our parents maybe never learned themselves. But it's really a skill, and because it's almost a dichotomy in that we're supposed to love ourselves, but we're also supposed to not be selfish, but we're also supposed to continually want to be better people. So I think it's just simply a matter of there's not very many people who have mastered this skill, maybe, and hopefully more people do. I also wanted to ask a question. As you're going through this process, were there any moments that, and I'm guessing there were, but any moments that you particularly remember in which you really wanted to give up? You felt that your obstacles were insurmountable and you wanted to turn back. And if so, what made you stay the course?
Yeah, there's many in the early stages where I really was questioning it, just thinking it would be so much easier to take a drink. And I remember one episode where my wife and I are both keen runners. I mentioned about the marathons, and we went out for a run. I think I was 1 day without alcohol or 2 days. And I was talking to her about what I was doing and saying, oh, another night of not drinking tonight. And suddenly just floods of tears were streaming down my face. And I just kind of broke down in the middle of the street, and she was hugging me. But just reminding myself of my non-negotiables. I keep a picture on my phone, as many people do, but it's myself and my son, but it's there for a reason. It's there to remind me that alcohol never goes before him. And then when I open my phone, there's a picture of my wife, which equally reminds me that that's non-negotiable. Alcohol never goes in front of them. And I think it was just really just not wanting to let other people down, which is actually the opposite of what we were just talking about, self-love. But it really got me through and kept me motivated during those challenging moments. But there were a few times where I was questioning it, wondering if I could do it. And the other time was the first 3 or 4 nights after quitting drinking. I barely slept at all. There was one occasion when I had been sleeping, I woke up and the sheets were just dripping wet where I'd been sweating. My body was going through a really big change, as was my mind. And that sleep, it was like sleep deprivation on top of craving to drink and all of the other things that were going on. So that was really tough. But again, I think that marathon mindset, and also I just kind of viewed it, particularly when there were cravings, like this is a storm. I'm in a house and this is a storm. The windows are going to rattle. The tiles are probably going to fling off the roof, but I'm safe and it's going to pass. And I always just remind myself that everything passes. It always passes. And I track the data. I journal and I keep the information to demonstrate to myself and prove that things always pass, and they always do. And often I would take myself off the bed, wake up the next morning, and lo and behold, that internal storm had passed.
Yeah. So often, and just for life in general, if you can make it through a bad day just to get to sleep and wake up the next day, often, not always, but often, you'll already be in a better position mentally, emotionally, maybe even physically. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think one other thing to point out that I've pointed out in previous podcasts, but in this specific instance, you had a support network around you. You had your wife and your son, who obviously care about you very much. And you also shared your struggles with select people. Like you didn't, I'm guessing you didn't tell your bank teller, hey, I'm quitting alcohol. And this is a big thing for me. But I'm guessing you probably told some close friends, your wife and your son, and they were able to, in moments of weakness, when you maybe didn't feel as strong, they were kind of able to bridge the gap and make up the difference, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And funny enough, I did tell the world. I started a blog and I shared it on there. I run a YouTube channel. I've got a Facebook group. It's got like 27,000 people in it. I didn't have that at the time, but I was just being really open about it. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. I overshare, and it's helped me and served me in many, many ways. But yeah, when you tell someone in the bank that actually I've just stopped drinking it, they might not give you that loan you want or whatever, but although they shouldn't hold it against you, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. They were there for me. They were super supportive, and that saw me through some of the dark periods. But I really kept a positive mindset. I think about it in the context of someone who's vegan when you're changing a behavior or beating an addiction. Instead of think like vegans don't sit in the corner crying because they can't have milk and they can't have dairy and meat. They're proud of it. It's a lifestyle choice. It's a badge of pride. And that's how I look at sobriety. I'm proud of it. It's a lifestyle choice. I've got t-shirts on that say sober rebel. I don't see it like I'm an alcoholic and I've got an illness or a disease. I see this as a positive and powerful lifestyle choice. I used to be an alcoholic. I'm not anymore.
I love that. I think that pride in your identity probably makes it a lot easier to stay the course and remain, because you fashioned yourself into kind of a new person. And even as we said, sharing sharing the struggle with random people, maybe not random, but a coworker or something, that kind of gives them a chance to become a supporter and to help build up your foundation in a way. And I think people would be surprised how many others would rather be a supportive person in that instance than someone who makes fun of you for trying to change your life or something like that. I think sharing really helps build
I
that
agree.
network.
Yeah, and I think the more vulnerable you are, the more you invite that same level of honesty and openness into your own life. I was astounded. In the first month or so after I stopped drinking, I think I had 5 or 6 messages from people who I'd been friends with on Facebook for years telling me that they were worried about their drinking too. I didn't even know that had a problem. Some of them I hadn't heard from or spoken to for decades. I went to school with them. They're reaching out to me saying, how did you do it? How did you do it? So I kind of immediately knew that this thing was taking a trajectory towards helping others and giving something back.
Wow. I love that. Usually when, I think it is Viktor Frankl that says, if you are to give light to others, you must burn, or something like that. But I think the idea is when you do try and change your life, I think people will come out of the woodworks admiring you or wanting to emulate you because they haven't quite taken that step yet.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I continue to do to this day is coach people. People obviously learn how to quit addictions through my books, and I run a program too. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. It does come with its downsides as well. I mean, my entire personal story is in the public domain, for example, and it can be a challenge when people kind of start to rely on you or depend on you, which I try and avoid. I try and keep boundaries tight. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so there is sense in what you said as well.
Awesome. Well, Simon, I've appreciated our conversation so much. We're coming down to the end of our time together, and I want to be respectful of your time as well. So before we get any further, how can people reach out to you, support you, and see what you're up to?
Probably through my website is the best way, which is besober.co.uk. chapple.co.uk, and that's got links to my Instagram, my Facebook community if anyone wanted to join that. My YouTube channel is also on there, so that's probably the best way. besober.co.uk.
Excellent. And there they can find your 2 previous books as well as your upcoming book this December.
Yeah, they're all on the website. They're on Amazon too, but if you head over to the website, everything's on there.
Perfect. And then we also do need to give our audience some action items. We don't want them going out and wondering what to do next. So this is the list that I came up with based on what we talked about. Number 1, get out of being in denial. Number 2, get 100% clear on your values. And number 3, build your support group and don't be afraid of sharing your struggles. Would you like to add to that list at all?
Yeah, I think I would add to that. Start gathering data, journaling or tracking your mood with an app. And again, I don't think this just applies to addiction. I just think this applies to developing yourself in life in general. Tracking data is crucial, and then actioning on what you learn from that data, patterns you spot, or behaviors, situations, people, places that need to change, for example. Gather data, treat it as a data gathering exercise. And I guess the other thing would be to treat it like an experiment rather than thinking this is a lifetime, I've got to give something up. Just treat it as an experiment. Imagine if your life was actually better if you made that change and you never gave yourself the opportunity to find out. Just treat it like an experiment, gather the data, and then make a decision at the end of it. Is my life better, or was it better before? If it's better before, then do what you were doing before, but be conscious about it. Just own it, and that's okay.
I love that. Treating everything like an experiment makes you more of a scientist and helps you focus on results as well as processes. And I think you kind of pull yourself emotionally out of simple life betterment. So, but thank you so much, Simon, for being on the show. I've really appreciated you sharing your story. And I know that my audience will definitely appreciate it. And hopefully they change their lives because of it. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. It's been brilliant. And you're doing some great work with the podcast. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. I'm still kind of getting back to normal after being sick. So hopefully today's episode was up to par and was reaching the level of quality you've come to expect from the Hard Thing Podcast. Now, obviously, the show isn't perfect, and I'd love to get your feedback. So if you get a moment, go ahead and send me some feedback on Instagram at the Hard Thing Podcast. Just send me a quick direct message. I appreciate any and all feedback. So just send me your thoughts or suggestions for future guests, and we'll see what we can do. Also, I'd like to invite you guys to go to ourrescue.org and get to know my favorite nonprofit organization, Operation Underground Railroad. They, like I said, they're a nonprofit, and they go undercover to rescue kids from sex trafficking, which is a huge endeavor. Make sure you go and just get involved, learn what they're all about, and see if you can help out in any way. Also, I'd like to invite you guys to go to thehardthingpodcast.com and explore what we have to offer you there. We have shirts as well as hats, stickers, masks, some merchandise. You can find it there, as well as you can listen to the podcast on the website. So go to thehardthingpodcast.com and see what's going on there. Again, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. Thank you guys for coming back every week, week in, week out, every Monday. I'm just really, really grateful for you guys. I wish I could talk to you guys by name. So if you get a chance, reach out to me on Instagram, like I said. But we'll be back next Monday with an excellent, excellent episode. I can't wait. And hopefully neither can you. But until then, keep doing hard things, and you will overcome average.